Live now, inshallah.
طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. All praise belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and peace and blessings of Allah ta'ala be upon all the prophets of Allah and the last and final messenger of Allah, the Imam of the messengers, the best of the messengers, the leader of the messengers, our beloved Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sallam. Brothers and sisters, welcome to our discussion today. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Those of you who are attached to our community and our Lewisham Islamic Center, you know this month we've been focusing on issues pertaining to health. So last week we started on spiritual health and the importance of being spiritually strong and healthy. And today, inshallah, we want to carry on, discuss another very pertinent, important topic, which is the topic which everyone, is discussing, the issue of vaccinations, the issues of pertaining to COVID-19, how that relates with us as Muslims, as individuals, as community members, as also with the wider society. So today, alhamdulillah, praise be to Allah Jalla wa ala, we have specialists, inshallah, in their field, inshallah, doctors, rather than imams speaking on the topic. Inshallah, we have, consultants, doctors that will, inshallah, speak on this topic. We will have with us Dr. Muhammad Wajid Akhtar. He's a doctor in cardiology. He's a vice president of British Islamic Medical Association. He's also a GP principal in Essex and a medical tutor in social media and medicine and history of medicine at Barts and the London Medical School. We also have with us Dr. Javed Ahmed, who's a consultant virologist, head of microbiology, Middle and South Essex Hospital, and also honorary consultant virologist in King's College Hospital. We have also with us Dr. Omar Taha. Dr. Omar Taha is a local GP. He's also the chair of South East London and Kent Council of Mosques and a trustee at Al Iman Centre in Keston Bromley. We also have with us Dr. Asadur Rahman, who also is a local GP and also is a member of South East London Kent Council of Mosques, is the former chair of Lewisham Islamic Centre trustees, and is also an advisor to Lewisham Islamic Centre and also to South London Kent Council of Mosques. So alhamdulillah, panelists are here, inshallah. And really, inshallah, I think the community want to hear from them in terms of what they have to say. Keep in mind, brothers and sisters, I think we have a tradition and a history in our Islamic teachings concerning medicine. In fact, our beloved messenger, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said in a hadith, Ya ibadallah tadawu, or servants and slaves of Allah, seek medical treatment. And there are a number of, you could say, ayats which actually, or a hadith which encourage us to seek medical treatment. In one hadith, the Messenger of Allah in Sahih al-Bukhari, he said, Ma anzal Allahu da'un illa anzala lahu shifa. When Allah Ta'ala sends down an illness, Allah Ta'ala sends with it a cure. So very, very important. That tradition is there, inshallah. And we really want to hear from our guests today, inshallah. And I would really like to start with maybe Dr. Umar Taha, inshallah, in terms of speaking about the risks of the coronavirus that we as a community, as a ummah, and of course, the wider community are facing today.
جزاكم خير إمام شكير. بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Thank you to everyone at Lewisham Islamic Center for arranging this really, really important topic. What I thought would be helpful would be to play the role of chair in guiding the discussion. There's a lot for us to cover in this topic. There are obviously many questions as well that people will have on their mind. I hugely encourage you, if you're listening, please get in touch with any questions that you have. Type it on the chat and we'll do our best to cover them. But nevertheless, we'll try and run through a bit of a systematic fashion of the issues and matters pertaining to the COVID-19 vaccinations and the pandemic itself. So without further ado, if we could maybe just start by painting the picture with looking at the broader landscape, coronavirus, a little bit of its history and where we are today, just so we can then segue that into the topic of vaccinations. So Dr. Wajid, if I could ask you, please, to give us that landscape.
Jazakallah khairan. Thank you so much. May I share my screen briefly?
Yeah, sure.
Jazakallah khairan. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salam ala ashrafil anbiya wa mursalin nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam wa ilayhi tasliman jami'an kathira. I'm going to give a very brief, hopefully I won't keep it more than 5 minutes, inshallah, presentation on the landscape, but also why you should listen to us. Because one of the important questions that most people will have is, who are these guys? I don't know who you are. I've never met you. Why should I trust you? Some of you may know a doctor and may know someone that is saying this, but you want to know what is the opinion of the medical or the healthcare community. So the first thing I want to say is, who are we? I'm speaking on behalf of the British Islamic Medical Association, and what the British Islamic Medical Association is a united body that brings together over 4,000 Muslim healthcare professionals from across the country. So we have doctors, physiotherapists, pharmacists, all sorts, who've come together about 6-7 years ago. And the idea was that we wanted to bring the barakah of unity to the Muslim healthcare community. When we're united, then we can give clear advice to our community, we can assist our community in terms of its health, and we can advocate for our community as well better, inshallah, if we work together. And we're inspiring each other to serve our community according to Islamic values. Like I said, it's a national body where we have sister organizations across the world. So there's 35 other Islamic medical associations. And you know what you can be sure of is that this is not one person's opinion. This is the opinion of quite a significant body of healthcare professionals, different ages, different nationalities, different specialities, and different types of thinking, that they've come to a common ground, inshallah, for the Muslim community. We've been doing a fair amount of work over the COVID period. We've been working with Muslim Council of Britain primarily, but with other masajid on when at the beginning it was suspending congregations, but reopening the masajid, how to do it in a safe way, advocating on behalf of the Muslim community in terms of visiting rights for our community to loved ones who are in hospital, talking about how to do safe ghusl, rapid review of literature during Ramadan, mental health advice, and so on. And we work with, like I said, the Muslim Council of Britain and many other Islamic organizations across the country and outside. So how did we, I'll come to this section in a bit, but to answer the specific question that Dr. Umar Taha came up with, what's the current situation? Well, this is the current situation right now. You know, we were talking about, you might have heard something called flattening the curve. We need to flatten the curve, we need to flatten the curve. Well, alhamdulillah, the UK has managed to successfully flatten the curve. The only problem is they flattened the curve the wrong way. It's flattened going up. So this diagram gives you just one little indication of how bad the situation is in this country. If it wasn't for America, it would be probably one of the worst in the world, where the rates of infection are rising to a degree where you have more than 1,000 people dying a day from this disease. That means every night, imagine 4 airplanes are falling out of the sky, every single night. And that's only the people who are dying. That's not including the people who are suffering but have not reached the stage of death, who are suffering in intensive care, who are suffering with long COVID, or who are suffering from mental health and other issues. That's not including the people who, because the hospital is full of COVID, they're not able to access their own health care, or people who with heart attacks who are staying at home, people with cancer who are having their surgery canceled. It is a disaster. This is not a life or death situation, brothers and sisters. This is a situation of how many tens of thousands of deaths are we going to talk about? I'm not exaggerating here. That is the question that we are actually facing right now. 3 weeks ago, the situation we were in is 1 in every 1,000 people in this country had passed away from COVID. It's worse now. And it's only, na'udhu billah, getting worse. We're in London, East London and Essex. This is Corona Central. It is absolutely devastating what's going on. I'm getting messages from healthcare professionals, doctors, nurses, who are saying that they are crying. When I saw this graph, 4 o'clock in the morning, I was sitting, I couldn't go to sleep again, panicking. This is not it to make people who work in intensive care in hospital panic, people who see death on a daily basis, to send a shiver up their spine. It's got to be really bad. And the UK, I'll finish in like 30 seconds, inshallah, because I don't want to overtake my time. The UK has not just managed to Brexit from the European Union, we've also managed to Brexit from safety as well. The rest of the European Union is continuing down this trajectory, but the UK has managed to find its own trajectory away from safety. And it is absolutely terrifying what's going on right now in the hospitals. And this graph doesn't do justice to the number of orphans, widows, people losing their loved ones without the chance to say goodbye. These don't do justice to what lies behind those graphs. London is, of course, leading the way, as it always does in the UK, making sure that it gets the highest number of infections. But don't worry, if you're not in London or if you have loved ones outside London, they're next. They're coming in a few days' time, Nauzubillah. Prepare yourself now for what is coming. And as usual, the ethnic minorities are at the forefront of dying suffering from this pandemic. And it seems like it's even worse in this wave. The anecdotal information is actually that the average age of people in intensive care is about 61, but people being admitted into hospital are even younger now, 30 and 40s are being admitted into hospital, gasping for air, struggling to breathe. Allah protect us all from what this is. If anyone tells you that this is the flu, they don't know what they're talking about. This is not just the flu. If anyone tells you that there's less deaths than last year or just a few more, please, if you don't believe any statistics or graph, go and ask the people, National Burial Council, the people who are burying it, because that statistic you cannot argue with. You cannot argue with the dead bodies. No one made those up. They are at record numbers, and Nauzubillah, again, we're reaching a situation that we didn't want to reach in the first wave. We're in a worse place right now, and it is really time to be scared, time to turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and time to take some measures, preventative measures, which I hope my brothers and sisters will talk about. Wa jazakumullah khairan.
Well, yeah, very, very worrying figures, to say the least. I think that's an understatement, and it looks ominous for the rest of this month at least. And I think maybe a point worth adding, really, I mean, something I've heard, I'm sure many of you may have, is the coronavirus real? It's a question that I've been asked as well. Dr. Asad, I'm not sure what your thoughts on that question are, if it was posed to you. Well, is this real? Is this really happening? Yes, we've seen graphs, but I want to know more.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Jazakallah khair for asking me to speak. I mean, I think as Dr. Wajid had mentioned, I mean, we've seen the greatly increased number of cases in this particular wave than before. And what someone had mentioned to me, I think it was one of my patients, he was saying on that first wave, although they had heard of COVID and they were aware of sort of the number of cases there, he said this time they actually knew people who were getting unwell, being admitted to hospital, going to ITU and even dying. And I think a lot of people in that position, sadly, because of the number of cases that we've seen. So I think that kind of reality, it hits home a lot harder when you know people in that position. And certainly in my own practice and getting a lot of results coming back to me and going through them, I've seen a change even in the space of a few weeks where we would get people's COVID results back, and maybe out of 20, 31 would be positive. Now we're looking at 40, 50% of them coming back positive. So I think if anyone's still asking that question, I'd be very surprised, because it is so prevalent now. And I think people have that personal experience of knowing someone who's become unwell, if not they themselves having actually had the virus and experienced it themselves firsthand. It's very, I mean, someone who comes with that kind of question, it's very difficult, because I think with a lot of issues, sometimes people will believe what they want, and it's very difficult. Even when you put up graphs and so on, they may still hold on to certain beliefs. There's certain ideas they'll hold on to, and it's very difficult. I think really the thing that has changed and will change people, if it hasn't done already, is what they can see among the people around them. So in short, and you answered your question, obviously, is it real? Yes, it's real. I mean, we see it around us, but I think that question perhaps is being asked less because it has become so much more prevalent, because people are firsthand experiencing the reality of COVID infection.
Thank you. And so then, tailing off that, Dr. Javeed, as was beautifully illustrated by Dr. Wajid, the extent of COVID and how it hit the world early 2020. What were the medical community's thoughts then in terms of how we can try and prevent the spread, and in particular with regards to vaccinations? I think it'd be helpful for us to get a little bit of a history of the vaccination process itself vis-a-vis viruses, and then segueing into the COVID-19 vaccinations.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Praise be to Allah, the Rabb of the worlds, and peace and blessings on the best of His creation, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. First of all, thank you to Imam Shakil and Dr. Wajid, Dr. Umar and Asad, and the Lewisham Islamic Center for inviting me. It's an honor and privilege to be here. That's a very good question, Umar. Why we are here, how we came here in terms of vaccinations point of view. But in the background, what has the policy been, how the policies have evolved, particularly over the last 12 months, and what has led us to make decisions which are possibly, I would say, not 180 degree, but varying from different advices from across the Atlantic and in this country. A brief background: coronaviruses are real. They have been here for millennia. There are other human medical coronaviruses which we already were aware of. And in the background, we also knew the MERS-CoV, which has been in the Middle East predominantly in the last 7-8 years. And when the first cases of SARS-CoV-2 appeared in Wuhan, China, at the end of the year 2019, and then quickly it spilled across the globe, becoming a pandemic in March 2020. What we need to be aware of is the reason for its being is highly infectious nature. This is a completely new coronavirus. It is closely connected to the original SARS-CoV, which was in 2003, which we managed to have the humanity, which alhamdulillah, which we managed to get rid of it within a year and a half. But this one appears to be different because the way it behaves, and it's also closely linked to bats coronaviruses. The reason why I mentioned bats coronaviruses is because there has been a lot of conspiracy theories and how this could have been possibly been man-made, manufactured, all these things. To put that conspiracy theory into the bin, somebody has to be a million times cleverer than any highly experienced virologist in the present planet to design such a virus which can affect everybody on the global scale. In the background, there were efforts to manufacture MERS-CoV vaccine, and they were actually getting closer. But however, the interest waned unfortunately, when the governments realized that it is not a major problem or a threat to their communities, particularly in resource-rich countries who felt otherwise. So that left the MERS-CoV vaccine production halfway. Now, when this happened early last year, the Chinese government quickly, the CDC, the Chinese CDC quickly produced a genetic code and made it to the public on the global domain available very quickly. Within a few days, that's a huge credit to them. And quickly, this was grasped by many of the scientists, both in America and in Europe. As a matter of fact, we know historically to produce a vaccine, it's not an easy task. It takes years and years and years. The quickest vaccine before this vaccine ever manufactured and rolled out to the public was the mumps vaccine, which was a little below 5 years. Now, when this genetic code was given, the best of the experts would say the earliest we can possibly get a vaccine, possibly because we never had a coronavirus vaccine. So we had to start from scratch. So it would be at least 12 to 18 months if we are being lucky. But however, fortunately, a group of scientists were working on what we call as mRNA, which is the ribose nucleic acid, the messenger RNA, and some of the scientists were working in the lab on the DNA for the last 2 to 3 decades. Now, unfortunately, their carriers got halfway through because there was no investment in such vaccines, or particularly which were designed for cancer vaccines. The German group and the American group who were working on similar mRNA technologies, particularly also the MERS-CoV vaccine group who were working, they realized that we can actually produce a vaccine quicker than 18 months using this technology, what they already had. And what they did was they took this mRNA, and the mRNA which codes for the spike protein. The coronaviruses have a spike. They have got a spike, they've got an envelope, and the spike has got the receptor binding protein, which actually binds to the receptor cell in the human respiratory cells. So the idea was, if we actually prevent or neutralize the spike, then we can prevent an infection, or possibly, or if not an infection, at least we can prevent severe COVID or COVID-19 symptoms. So that was a philosophy right from the start. Mind you, this is not like we have got a year worth of research. I'm trying to tell the audience that there is a huge amount of research, not 1 year, 20 to 30 years of huge amount of research here involved in this mRNA vaccine. So they took the mRNA, which now we know from genetics, the central dogma for transcription and translation is the mRNA. So if we have mRNA, we can produce proteins by translation within the cell, either in the nucleolus or in the cytoplasm. So what the researchers did was they took the mRNA, which codes specifically for the spike protein, and they did a phase 1 trials, phase 2, phase 3, which we know the studies of Moderna and the Pfizer trials, which have been hugely successful. And I have to tell you in the background, even until 3.5, 4 months ago, everyone was not expecting that it will be huge efficacy, because we were expecting probably around 60, maximum 70%. And then it came as a very comforting surprise that both the vaccine, Moderna and the Pfizer, have got efficacy of more than 90-95%. The way it works is the mRNA is encoded in a lipid nanoparticle, and it is developed simply so that we can deliver the mRNA inside the cytoplasm. And I had to make it very clear, this mRNA is non-replicative, meaning to say, number one, it does not go and replicate, it just codes for the spike protein. And number two, most importantly, it's a self-degrading. Within 7 to 8 days, it degrades. So one question which I get commonly asked is, what happens if this gets integrated into the host chromosome? Viruses, we know, human genome has got 10% of the human genomes have got virus like genes in us. So there is a conspiracy going on that mRNA can actually become integrated into the host chromosome. That's not true, because this is self-degrading. So once inside a cytoplasm, this mRNA encodes the spike proteins, and the proteins, either when the cell gets destroyed by apoptosis or by destruction by the phagocytes, or when the proteins are expressed in the cell, then the B and the T cell immunity kicks in, and we have the initial antibody response. And then when we give a boost, which is typically only after 21 days after the initial priming, then we know for a fact there is a heightened response. Now, we know as a matter of fact, with the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine and the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, when we give the first dose, there is an antibody protection. And it prevents COVID-19. But when we give the priming, when we give the second dose, it boosts both the B and the T cell, and it matures the antibody response, and also gives like a boost to the memory cells as well. It's very important. The second vaccine is had as per the manufacturer's recommendations. So that's the short history of how we came here in terms of the vaccine. I had to highlight the ChAdOx vaccine, which is the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, is slightly different vaccine. It is more, I would say, although it's a newer generation, but it is still an orthodox vaccine where they're taking the chimpanzee adenovirus, which lacks the envelope. Typically, adenovirus has got an envelope, but the chimpanzee adenovirus does not have an envelope. So they have coded the part of the adenovirus into this mRNA, which expresses the spike proteins. So although it is a live chimpanzee adenovirus, it's a live vaccine, but however, it is a non-replicative. So that's why it's called a newer generation vaccine. So the chimpanzee adenovirus is replication deficient. It does not go inside a human respiratory cell and does not have the capability of replicating it. It's so designed that it cannot replicate, but it expresses the spike proteins after the translation of the mRNA, and thereby, as I said, with the other Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, the mechanism of efficacy kicks in. So that's a short story. I hope I made that clear. Thank you.
Barakallah fiqh, Dr. Javid. Very, very comprehensive. And you know what was really highlighted there in particular was a common question: does the mRNA alter one's genes? And I think you categorically there clearly stated that no, it doesn't. It only lasts for a very short period of time. It's not there to alter our genome or anything like that. It has a specific purpose for vaccination. Two questions that also came to mind, and Dr. Wajid, if you could maybe expand on one. It was, well, why are we even vaccinating in the first place? What is this history? What is the philosophy behind vaccination itself? Why have we gone down this route? How do we know it works?
Well, Jazakallah khair for this. Vaccines have become controversial, but you know, subhanAllah, it's like Muslims were involved in developing some of these mRNA vaccines, and also Muslims are rejecting it. Vaccines have a history. If you go back, there was a disease called smallpox, which was afflicting millions of people across the world, causing disfiguration and death. And the British ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, his wife noticed the Muslims in the Ottoman Empire didn't have as much smallpox as they did in the UK. And she found out that what they were doing was that they were taking like thorns, putting it into cowpox, which is a disease similar to smallpox, but not deadly. And then they were variolating, which is almost like vaccination, to themselves. And so she came back here and she told everyone, she's rich, she's powerful, she's connected, she knew the queen. What happened? People didn't really listen to her. Why? Because she was a woman. So they was like, listen, you know, it doesn't matter what you say, we're not going to take anything from the Muslims and we're not taking anything from you, right? So it's a double trouble there. 80 years later, a man called Edward Jenner came to the same conclusion And I'm from the same university that he went to, and they even have the cow that he took the vaccine from and put it into people. And he developed vaccination. Vax is from the word cow. Even then, there were these conspiracy theories. They said that people will become half cow if you took the smallpox. Smallpox is gone now, alhamdulillah. So vaccines are one of the big success stories of humanity. Millions of lives are being saved every year from diseases that would have killed off many people. And this is no different. This is a disease which has come, and they found a vaccine. Now people will say, whoa, I'm really concerned. It's very fast. Where's the vaccine for HIV? Where's the vaccine for the cold? Well, how can you do it in 10 months? Very suspicious. And what I tell to them is that, no, it's not suspicious. Just like if you needed knee surgery, you need a knee replacement. You go, your knee hurts, you go and see your GP, he gives you some painkillers, then you go back again. I'm a GP, not a cardiologist. I've done a diploma in cardiology, but then eventually he refers you to a surgeon. Then the surgeon sees you, he says, yeah, I think you need a scan. Then he sees you again, then he refers you. It could be 6 months, maybe 9 months before you get your knee surgery. But if you break your leg in a car accident, if you burst your appendix, it could be 6 minutes and you're on the operating table. Would you turn around at that point and say, this is very suspicious? 6 minutes, 6 months it took me to get my knee surgery. I would rather wait another 6 months, see how my broken legs go. You wouldn't say that, because you know that your broken leg or your burst appendix is an emergency. So you go to the front of the queue. More money is being thrown at it, more time, more energy, more resources. It's an on-call doctor whose job is to make sure that you survive this period of time. That's the same with the COVID vaccine. What's happening? They cut out the red tape. They threw a lot more funds at it. A lot more people are thinking about it and working on it. And there's just a lot more COVID going around. So that's what made it go faster. They didn't necessarily cut corners in safety. That's what we're trying to explain.
So very, very nicely put there. In terms, it's a very common question, from 10 years to within a year, and you've answered that beautifully. So another question then, and a concern that arises is, well, what about big pharma? We know that they're out there to make a buck, and they've got their self-interests at heart. So, how can we trust them in producing a vaccine? That's to anyone.
I don't mind. Dr. Javeed, you're muted. Please go ahead. Unmute.
I can attempt to answer that, Omar. Thank you. It's understandable when big pharmaceutical companies get involved. There must be interest. You probably could say greed on part of these big pharmaceutical companies. We have to appreciate that we are in the middle of a pandemic, and also the governments, fortunately, have collaborated across the world, irrespective of the differences. They've set the differences apart. Governments have pumped in millions of dollars, millions of pounds into this vaccine production. Just to give an example, if there is anything Trump has done positive in his regime of 4 years, I would say it's Operation Warp, which he spent $18 billion on manufacturing these vaccines. And that's just an example of United States. Of course, other countries, China, India, even poor countries have pumped in their heart and soul into the vaccine production. And also there have been philanthropists also hugely involved in this vaccine production. We have to appreciate the capacity to produce millions and millions and millions of doses. It's not an easy task. And we would have to bank this upon somebody who has got an experience. Now, I mean, when Dr. Wajid said the Muslim scientists, I'm glad he mentioned that. Pfizer vaccine, I remember anecdotally, it was called a few months ago as a Muslim vaccine has come into the market. So, I mean, and those two scientists who were involved, and also the scientists in Moderna vaccine, they were very conscientious people. It's a very, they have put their lives behind this vaccine. And if somebody was there in place, they would actually collaborate with somebody who has the know-how technology to manufacture in such large doses. And whom would you think in first place? Somebody who has done a GSK or Pfizer, something like papillomavirus vaccines, or large vaccine production skills. So and who also have a global presence. I mean, those are the key things. So yeah, I know I cannot completely dismiss this out. Of course, there is some benefit to the pharmaceutical companies. Nobody can deny that. But in the middle of the pandemic, I think these questions do not actually serve the purpose. I think we'll be myopic if we consider that way, if the pharmaceuticals are benefiting it here. But I think the whole philosophy of vaccine production is such a large scale, and different vaccine platforms, and different, and each, none of Pfizer is mRNA, and the other Oxford is AstraZeneca. They are two completely different technologies. So I would say, I think we should look in terms of preventing deaths, preventing morbidities, and also getting that herd immunity to such a desirable level. We don't get our hospitals overwhelmed. I hope maybe I answered to some of it, but I know it's quite a difficult question.
Thank you. Yes, no, and definitely a common one, and I feel you answered that well. A follow-up question, however, would be, well, how transparent are they? We talk about Pfizer as part of big pharma and a big company, and then they've got their researchers on the ground. Could they not just make up, tweak results in their favor in order to serve their own purposes?
Well,
for anyone?
Yeah, the answer to that question would be, this is the amount of people involved in the vaccine, the amount of scientists involved. There are too many across the world. You can't, I think it's unrealistic to have all the scientists trying to dupe in at the same time. The amount of data which has been generated, like Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, they have been published in reputed peer-reviewed journals, and they are like top-class journals. And the editors are top class. The reviewers who have reviewed these articles are top class, and the people who have been reading them, the scientific audience which have written, and they have critically reviewed over the last 45 days, their phase, not only their phase 3, I'm talking about their phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 clinical trials. And they have looked at very objectively. There has been no subjective inference from any of these trials. And mind you, this is something which is interesting, which actually proves that both these are true, to my knowledge, is that Pfizer, when they published, they had around 40,000 people in the phase 3 trial, half of them who received the Pfizer vaccine and the half of them placebo. Okay, and they come up earlier when they published that their efficacy is more than 90%. I think it was 94 to 95% efficacy. And then a few days later, Moderna vaccine, a completely different group of scientists, okay, having the same technology, mRNA vaccine, having different, around, again, same 40,000 population, with half of them receiving the placebo and the other half receiving the mRNA vaccine, come exactly with similar data. I mean, with the similar, like about 90%. If there was some untruth behind it, you would observe one could be 95%, one could be 65%. I mean, there would be huge variation. I mean, two technologies delivering the same kind of principle and philosophy of the vaccine, and we have similar, what I'm trying to say, these are reproducible results. So that's why I believe the data has not been skewed. And I think it is out there, and it is there in global domain. It is available for the public to review it. I don't have any kind of shred of doubt to doubt either of those two vaccines.
Okay, so almost as if sort of somewhat of a principle that it's too large and impossible for them all to have agreed upon a lie, in a sense, is what it sounds like. As I mentioned there of phases. So if we've gone back now, we're in the April time, and based on our knowledge of vaccinations, it's worked in the past. And now there's a race really to get a vaccination out. There was a mention of phases 1, 2, and 3. Dr. Asad, if you could sort of just briefly outline an understanding of what that means.
If I could just take it back a little bit,
yeah,
if that's okay, Omar, because I'm wary that sometimes you've got people listening in or watching, and terms can get a bit technical, and where it makes a lot of sense to us and it's really really useful information, it might it may be difficult maybe some people to follow. So maybe just go all the way back. I mean, with regards to vaccines, without repeating everything, I mean, it's maybe just to stress that first of all, it's eliciting a response from our own body. It's our own immune system that we're listening to. It's not that the vaccine is only sort of just if you like prompting that in ourselves. It's our own immune system that's learning and then responding. And as Dr. Ahmed very nicely said, that this RNA from this new the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine actually just degrades. So the RNA isn't it's not that's not what's giving us an immune response, but it's actually from our own bodies that's prompting that immune response. You've also mentioned about the pharmaceutical companies. So these drug companies, potentially, are they making a lot of money? Have they seen that there's there's this sort of financial incentive to produce a vaccine? And I mean, that again, going back to this point, and what I mentioned previously, that people will hold on to certain beliefs or certain ideas, and it's not just even pharma. I mean, I've heard it said as well that even those of us administering the vaccine, so you've got GPs being paid or making money for promoting this. So you may have people watching and saying, oh, well, of course he's saying that because he's going to get paid for giving the vaccine, or they're going to make money for giving the vaccine. So it's not even pharmaceutical companies. People hold these kind of beliefs will still have that idea about ourselves. And maybe we're all sat here because we've got something to make out of this as well. And again, just as a general principle, I mean, yes, there is money involved because, that people have to be paid for working beyond their normal jobs and their hours for the resources, the facilities, the sites, everything taken into account to deliver these vaccinations at an incredible speed. I mean, we're making hundreds of phone calls to get people in, usually within a day, a few days or so on, because of the rate that we're getting the vaccines in. And any money that's then, that comes in for that, I mean, do you break even? Do you even make a loss from doing that? That's not really the most important thing. I mean, in my experience, working both, not just in general practice, but in my days working in hospital as well, I mean, I would, invariably see healthcare professionals going regularly beyond the call of duty because of their own sense of duty or a sense of helping their patients. So I think it's important to make that clear, because I know there will be people watching thinking, well, it's easy for these people to say that and they've got some vested interest in it. And if that in any way does dispel that myth, I think it's really important for us to say that yes, there will be money involved in terms of being able to set up services and deliver it. But, bear in mind, there are people that are working well beyond their normal hours, the people making a loss, and actually I would want, for example, my family, my loved ones, to be able to be given something which is safe, which is, as Dr. Ahmed mentioned, peer reviewed in a safe setting by people who know what they're doing and giving the vaccinations appropriately. And we can't expect that if we're not sort of investing our time and energy into those things. The same way we're seeing these really tragic scenes in intensive care units, critical care units, where we're seeing these units just being overwhelmed. And you've got the nurses, doctors, and so on, that are really being pushed to the limits. And don't think they just stop when they stop their shift. they're carrying that home with them. They're thinking about these patients when they're back at home. They don't just switch off. It's not a day job or a night shift where suddenly they can just switch off. They're still thinking about these things. It's going on in their minds. And they're back at work again, doing another, a hectic shift that's really taking a toll on them mentally, physically. And I think we have to understand that these are people who are looking after our families if we're unfortunate for them to become unwell. These are people who are, as I say, from my own experience, I've seen they go beyond the call of duty. And I really want to make that clear, because I really feel very strongly about that when people do bring up some of these issues, be it sort of money or sort of incentives to deliver certain healthcare initiatives, be it vaccination or whatever it is. So I think I've completely missed your question. Apologies.
No.
I did think it was important just to mention.
For the addition, really, really helpful and valuable to put it in context in terms of the monetary side of things. And so then going back to April then, and sort of now looking forward, and we do want this vaccine out, and so trials are being done. And there was a mention of phase 1, 2, and 3. What do these terms mean? What are these phases of the trials themselves? Dr. Wajid.
I think I'll hand to Dr. Jaweed, because he's actually our expert in this. So Dr. Jaweed will give us a better answer than my GP explanation.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Asad, for highlighting one point. And I think I do need to underline my statement here. I don't have any conflict of interest. This is just for the wider panel and the wider audience. No money is received, no funds received. In terms of Omar, what are these? When we want to bring in anything new as a medication, there are certain things it needs to undergo. First is whether is this product, is it safe? So to do that, what we do is the researchers experiment in animals, if it is allowed, and what we call that as those are preclinical trials. And that idea is to see if there is any toxicity, and then once it gets approved, then it goes to phase 1 clinical trial. In phase 1 clinical trial, what happens is it's a small cluster of human beings, healthy adults. And the very idea to see the toxicity profile, the side effects, and what could be the way of administering the vaccine, what's the best optimum dose. Those are the things which are answered, the key questions in the phase 1. Once the phase 1 trial is completed and the data looks promising, we go on to the phase 2 trial, which again, which is similar, but in terms of the volunteers are much more than the phase. They probably are in few thousands. And again, is the same question, the more optimization of the dose, how the vaccine is performing, side effects, and whether is there any other way of delivering this vaccine, or can the vaccine be further fine-tuned? Those are the things which we get from phase 2. And finally, when we move to, when we move to phase 3 often is a randomized double-blind controlled trial often. What that means to the wider audience is the volunteers do not know or not aware what product or what vaccine in this case are receiving. They might receive a placebo, they might receive the drug in question, like here in the vaccine. So the volunteer doesn't have any clue or any idea. And that's done simply to prevent any kind of alteration in human behavior. Because, for example, if a volunteer knows that he has had a vaccine, he may become a bit more brave. He might take off the mask, he might reduce social distancing. So the volunteer, they are not aware what they receive. And they run in thousands, this double blind, and often it is multi-centric. So both this, all these three, the Oxford, the AstraZeneca, the Oxford, the Pfizer, and Moderna, they are all multi-centric phase 3 randomized controlled trials. So that's the meaning of phase 3. And once the phase 3 is available, and then it's approved, so it goes to the regulatory body, what we call it at that stage as RR, regulatory review. and then it waits for the regulatory review. You might have heard in the press something called EUA, Emergency Use Authorization, and then the FDA or the MHRA can approve these medications, these vaccines. And mind you, the investigation do not stop here. Then still they go on to something called phase 4. At this point of time, all the 3 vaccines are in phase 4 for UK, Moderna, Pfizer, and the Oxford vaccine. So in the phase 4, they will observe if there has there been any kind of striking adverse effects, are there any mortalities, unexpected mortalities. So this is a phase 4. And I have to say, a caveat is, if there's an overwhelming evidence in any of these trials, then the researchers can actually abruptly stop it and say, no, the evidence is overwhelming. Either it is overwhelming toxic or it is overwhelmingly beneficent. So let's stop it and let's roll it out to the wider public. So I think that's a brief summary of preclinical, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and regulatory review and phase 4 trials. Thank you.
A question from that is, I've heard that there was some overlap of these phases. So normally we'd expect one after the other. But as we understand, these sort of all happened at once. Can you maybe expand upon that?
I think that's a bit difficult to answer in the current context with what has happened with the vaccine development last year. There has been, there has been an intense demand pressure and to generate very quickly. So what normally happens in 4 or 5 years has been condensed to less than 10 months. And I don't think the researchers had a luxury to wait. Okay, let's wait for the phase 1 clearance and then go on to phase 2. I mean, the background work will always be being done even before phase 1 trials are published. Before that itself, they'll be looking at how to design a phase 2, how to design a phase 3 trial. I do not know the specifics, but I think that's my understanding. And I believe, to the best of my knowledge, there will be an overlap between these different trials.
Anything else to add there, Asad?
I was just going to say that I seem to remember sort of early on in the pandemic, a colleague at the time had I think it was a family member who was working on the vaccine developments at that time as well. And again, it was very intense for them. They were really working around the clock. So let's not forget that even with these sort of research teams, I mean, we probably have in mind, as I mentioned before, with IT or A&E sort of, and the pressure they're under, but even these research teams, I mean, they really were working around the clock as well. And making those kind of efforts in order to expedite stages of this vaccine developments. And it may be worth mentioning as well, just highlighting what Dr. Ahmed had alluded to, was the review of the data that had been published. I mean, this is things that can be peer reviewed. I mean, even now we read in the journals how the data is being looked at. And with organisations like the MHRA in the UK, which is the Medicines Healthcare Product Regulation Agency, and the JCVI, Joint Committee on Vaccines and Immunisation. So these are independent bodies that are looking and advising on these vaccinations and how they should be delivered. So again, it's useful to be aware of this, and all this information is available. It's not hidden, it's not secretive, it's not difficult to find. I mean, it's easy to find this and the research information. So much so that I was even looking up today the excipients in the different vaccines, especially with the AstraZeneca one being approved recently. And again, it's listed there. They've got information already ready for patients, so it's all very much available. And not difficult to find.
Actually, sort of based on what was mentioned before, in terms of just how wide scale the trials were across the globe as well, and the uptake volunteers for Pfizer. I mean, we're looking at 44,000 plus. AstraZeneca 24,000. And so in a way, it was, like Dr. Wajid said, sort of fast-tracked in the context of it being an emergency. And there are so many people around that were available to put themselves forward, that actually it looks like these phases, while there wasn't the luxury to have phase 1, assess, take some time, move on phase 2, actually the resources were all there for them to work simultaneously, one after the other, but in a combined way, while constantly reviewing and seeing it as safe to move on and peer review the results, as you mentioned.
And as Dr. mentioned as well, I mean, that this is ongoing as well. So on top of those 40,000 that you had, for example, for the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccination, prior to it being approved in the UK, now you've had what, 1.5 million people have had that vaccination, and monitoring the process, you know, any adverse effects and so on is an ongoing issue and part of this.
A question though, the UK were first in approving this. How did that work? Did they rush into this?
Again, I don't know, Dr. Ahmed, if you want to sort of mention this, because it's probably more your area, but I'm probably repeating what perhaps Dr. Ahmed has already said. I mean, we've got the MHRA, which is the UK body, which has looked at this information and approved, and this is independent of governments as well. And you know, the same vaccine has been approved separately by, for example, the FDA in the States and so on in other places. So you're looking at, and they would have looked at the raw data as well, which I think is a little bit different from the process here. So actually, you're not even looking at one body that has approved it. You're looking at a number of organizations, all of who have looked at this information data and have approved it. So, you know, it kind of leads back into what Dr. Ahmed was speaking about before in terms of the number of people involved in this and the amount of information being looked at.
Just to add to that, thank you, Asad, Dr. Omar, is to, you know, historically, yes, FDA has been in the forefront. So this time, I mean, people do admit it was a bit shocker that the UK MHRA was ahead. I mean, that doesn't mean that FDA was lacking behind. I mean, there was only a few days difference between FDA and the MHRA. Mind you, there is always a political picture behind such things as well. I mean, the political drive, and there are other goals which have to be achieved, which obviously is beyond the scope of this talk. I think I seriously don't think there has been much of difference between the UK and the US in terms of licensing these vaccines. I mean, other day I was hearing an American expert, and of course, you know, Americans, they laugh at the UK in terms of, oh yeah, they got the thalidomide wrong many years ago, and we got it right. You know, there will always be history behind this, and the picture gets clouded with so many other subjective issues.
That point you made there in particular, Dr. Javid, in that whether or not the UK were early or not, well, we can see now that both America and the European regulatory agencies, they've all agreed in the safety of the vaccines. And so then looking at the vaccines, so we now have 3. And if you could just outline each of the vaccines, what the results were in terms of how effective are they, and will they protect us from the COVID-19 pandemic?
Okay, right. Okay, that's a very comprehensive question to be summarized in a.
If you can maybe sort of the general percentages. So if we were to have each of these vaccines, how well will it protect us?
Yeah, the endpoint efficacy for the Moderna and the Pfizer was preventing illness. The endpoint efficacy of Oxford was to see if they had developed neutralizing antibodies. Both the Pfizer and the Moderna have got similar efficacy in preventing illness, which is closer to 95%. And that was it from the summary from the phase 3 clinical trials. The Oxford vaccine, I have to say, there has been some kind of cloudiness in terms of its efficacy. Because, I'm sorry to use that word. I mean, the efficacy initially came out between 62 to 72%, and then there was a subset of the population who received, for unknown reason, or inadvertently, possibly, who received half the dose. And apparently their vaccine response was much higher. And they say it is as good as the other two vaccines. Now, when we look at phase 3, we should also appreciate when somebody is measuring neutralizing antibodies has their endpoint efficacy. And if that's what Oxford is saying, we have to go back to their phase 1 clinical trial and look at their data at that time. The first dose vaccine, the neutralizing antibody was, from memory, I recall it was around 8,000 some units neutralizing titers. And then in the same phase 1 clinical trial, when they boosted with the second dose 4 weeks later, they found from 8,000 it had gone up to 61,000. Meaning to show that how important the second dose was. And that seems to have dropped off. And I'm actually surprised, even the best of the experts, I don't know whether it was knowingly or unknowingly, that's phase 1 trial data seems to have been dropped off, and they just say, well, the phase 3 trial of Oxford vaccine shows excellent efficacy for preventing COVID-19, particularly nearly 100% in preventing severe COVID-19. So I would say, in summary, they're as good, and they do the job, which is basically preventing COVID-19.
What about in terms of then, we've heard that, okay, they do a job, they do a good job, and they can protect us from the illness. But then on the flip side, vaccinations, medications in general have side effects. And so what are some of the potential side effects we can expect from the vaccinations?
Well, when we look at the ingredients of the Pfizer, Moderna, and the Oxford vaccine, particularly the Pfizer and the Moderna, they don't seem to have enormous ingredients like what the traditional vaccines had. There are hardly 5 or 6 ingredients, including the mRNA, which basically is mRNA, lipid particle, cholesterol, some polyethylene glycol, some sucrose as a stabilizer, and some other agent. The adverse effects have been I would say in all 3. The main adverse effect has been pain at the site of the injection. Some people complaining for a few days, and some people having a swollen arm, and maybe because of lymph node enlargement. The main main adverse effect has been pain, followed by fever, and some people have complained of generalized tiredness, but no serious side effects which have been observed in the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine. The Oxford vaccine adverse effects, again, no serious adverse effects reported in their group of people who received the Chadox vaccine. However, there was one case of transverse myelitis in a patient in placebo group. So that was that had slightly paused the trail. I think it was in mid-September. And however, we also know that there are 2 cases of transverse myelitis in the vaccine group as well. But one case was in multiple sclerosis patient, and the other one is still an explanation is being sought. So I wouldn't say that there are zero serious side effects. But generally, it seems to be well tolerated, all the 3 vaccines. Like as Dr. Rahman said, 1.5 million people have received particularly the Pfizer vaccine. Apart from popular heat-generating press, there has been not much reported side effects.
So in general, some side effects we might expect from any vaccination, like you summarized. But other than that, the other kind of more significant and serious side effects, very much low risk of developing them. As Muslims, then, in terms of the ingredients, is there anything within the vaccinations that we should be aware of, and how can we try and reconcile that, Dr. Wajid? If I could bring you in.
Yep. Jazakallah khairan. So the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine has no animal ingredients in it whatsoever, and it wasn't using a human cell line either. So from all angles, it's pretty much as clean as you get. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine contains an excipient of alcohol, which means that there is of ethanol, and ethanol is needed for the soluble nature of some of the products. Just to give you an idea, there is probably more ethanol in a banana or a ripe banana than there is in the vaccine that you would take. But you don't hear this kind of stuff because unfortunately the stuff that gets put out there seems to come at it with an agenda. Things like, oh, the vaccines contain aluminum. Well, there's more aluminum in an average egg than you might get in all the vaccines that you will ever have in your life. Oh, the vaccines contain formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is terrible. Formaldehyde is used for preserving bodies or whatever it is. There's more formaldehyde in the human body, in the blood, than there is in the vaccine. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that we're dealing with. You know, that it might change your DNA. There's no way that RNA can change your DNA. It doesn't do that. It doesn't go into the nucleus. But what's happening with a lot of these questions, because there's a lot of questions being thrown. We seem to be playing ping pong. You give a reassurance on alcohol, then they'll say, what about embryos? You give a reassurance on embryos, they'll say, but what about the PCR test? I heard the PCR test is rubbish. Then you give a reassurance on that, and then they'll say, but what about Big Pharma? You give a reassurance on Big Pharma, and say, what about this? What about that? It just doesn't stop. The reality is, and I would advise the brothers and sisters who are watching this, is that you have a choice. Either you become an expert, you go to medical school, you become a scientist, you become an expert in vaccines, and how to read papers and statistics and science, and then you go and work in Big Pharma, and then you go and develop, and you do all that, or you do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. And there are, alhamdulillah, enough Muslims in every field of healthcare, and in literally in every pharmaceutical company, and in every health regulatory authority that you can actually find that you can get advice. And either the communist Chinese and the capitalist Americans who have competing vaccines, Pfizer and AstraZeneca, which are competing companies, the Muslim healthcare physicians and the atheist healthcare physicians, and the Jewish and the Hindu healthcare physicians, and the doctors and the pharmaceutical industry and the politicians, either we've all become traitors to humanity at the same time and all our agendas have aligned together, or maybe, just maybe, someone is trying to pull strings over here and create doubt. Now, there is this important thing. We're not saying don't ask questions. We're not saying trust us, blind taqleed. That's not what we're saying. There's healthy skepticism where you ask questions. Because there is question. We're asking questions. Hey, does this make sense? How is this happening? Can you give us an idea? You know, we're asking questions. So there's healthy skepticism, but when it becomes unhealthy is when you turn around to your healthcare professionals, the people that you trust with your life. When they put you under general anesthetic, they could do whatever they want, right? When you have a heart attack and they put the catheter into your heart valve, into your coronary artery, they just need to sneeze and you're gone. And it will be chalked up as a mistake. When you take all the other medicines that you take, every other drug that you take, you're trusting the same company. So what we're saying is that these people you trust with your life, you trust with the lives of your children and your parents, the healthcare professionals, then if you lose trust in them, then I get really worried about what is going to happen to in the future. That's when it gets worrying. So if you have healthy skepticism, that's fine. Unhealthy skepticism is never being satisfied with any answer. Unhealthy skepticism is believing that everyone has an agenda, everyone is guilty until proven innocent. Try to find the balance, inshallah. Healthy skepticism is good. Unhealthy, it will be damaging not just to you and to the community. And that's what, unfortunately, that's what we're seeing a lot of with these WhatsApp videos and things being sent around. We have to organize an event like this because there's too much unhealthy skepticism around.
In terms of, I think Dr. Wajid's statement there. فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Sorry, the Quranic statement from Allah Ta'ala. Ask those who know, who are specialists, if you do not know. And I think this issue, I mean, it's such a serious issue. It's like, it's people's lives at risk. And then you have people who have no, I mean, it might even be, imams. And one of the reasons why, we organize this is because people are asking me this question. Is it permissible? Is it not permissible? Is it a conspiracy? So look, this is not for me to answer. Let's bring in the specialists who are in that field and are, have knowledge of this subject to answer this kind of like topic and in these questions. Now, what is very important and crucial is, look, the Messenger of Allah said in a hadith, it says, "Man uftiya bi ghayri ilmin, kana ithmuhu ala man aftah." Somebody gives a ruling or a verdict without knowledge, he will have the sin of for the fatwa that he or she has given. In one hadith, he sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, if somebody man afta bi ghayri ilmin, la'anathu malaikatu as-sama'i wa malaikatu al-ard. Somebody gives a verdict without knowledge, then the angels of the heavens and the angels of the earth will curse that person. So I think especially in this field where is the issue of kind of life and death and great risks, it is very, very important. We're not just watching videos and messaging, individuals are messaging through WhatsApp messages and we just believe that. It's very important. Experts in the field, like Dr. Javed and others are, inshallah, speaking about it, and we're listening, inshallah. Yeah, but Dr. Omar, there are a number of questions online, but I don't know, if you give me the opportunity to ask you, and then you can direct it to one of the panelists, inshallah.
Please do.
Yeah, so some you have answered, some are, you could say, border conspiracy, but yes, we will try and ask. So one of the questions, Dr. Omar, is, and I think you directed to who you feel is more able to, inshallah. One is, does the COVID appear more in colder countries, or is that a myth?
Dr. Javed.
Well, we know from our understanding of infectious diseases, particularly respiratory infectious diseases, they seem to spread fast when the climate is colder. As a matter of fact, I mean, though nobody's going to deny that, because we see in winter, just if you look at the influenza, although influenza virus can affect anybody at any point of the year, but if you look at the September to March data in United Kingdom consistently in the last few decades, it always rises in the peak of the winter. Then you have got a respiratory syncytial virus, one of the common childhood respiratory viral infection. And people may say what they like, but every year, December, it comes right on top of the graph in UK. They explain there are hypotheses, and you would find speculations as well why this happens. All I want to emphasize here is, do not take the message that the virus dies in summer. No, doesn't happen. And the virus is simply because people are probably come close together, and there is a highly likelihood chance of the virus infecting a susceptible host in a winter period, particularly in the colder in the colder countries. But this doesn't mean that in summer they will not have this. I mean, at this point of time for COVID-19, the main thing is to develop herd immunity to such high levels that we will hope that it goes to its just like any other common cold circulating virus. That's our key purpose. But if we don't achieve that high levels of herd immunity, whether it is April to June or July or August, we will still see COVID-19 if we don't have enough herd immunity. And then again, come back October, November, December. Again, if the herd immunity is lacking, then again we will have epidemics happening. You could say phase 3 of the epidemic or phase 4 of the. I mean, these things are likely to happen if you don't achieve the herd immunity very quickly.
Can I pick off of that as well, please? So, in terms of the vaccinations, is the idea to vaccinate as many people as we can in order to prevent spread? Or is it more that we want to vaccinate, say, the vulnerable in order to protect them from the effects of the coronavirus?
That's a very good question, Omar. Excellent. I mean, I don't think I have a complete answer, but to my understanding, what we need to know at this point of time, to the best of my knowledge, none of these three vaccines claim that they prevent infection. What they prevent is a COVID-19 or severe COVID-19. What that means for the general for the wider public is that there could possibly, even having the Oxford vaccine, there will still be people can be infected, and they might actually even have replication in the upper respiratory tract, and they may actually transmit the infection to their close contact, family members or their work colleagues. So vaccines, to what we know, COVID-19 vaccine, they do not prevent infection. They do not prevent transmission. There is a bit of hope with the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, because the way the mRNA vaccine works is to prevent the infection in the first place. But however, we have to wait and watch the space, what happens over the next few months. Now the idea is to, because it's a new virus, so basically majority of the human beings do not have any kind of immunity knowledge to this virus so the idea is to make their host recognize the virus and counteract with the vaccine mounted response. And the higher we achieve, the better that is. Now, some people, I mean, this is another worrying thing which people have asked me, and particularly from our community. Well, it affects the older adults and the vulnerable adults. Why do I need to get vaccinated? I mean, this is a troublesome query, because in the pandemic, I mean, if I had to give an analogy, it's like you have a dam, and the dam has got a few cracks, and the water in a non-monsoon period, when the dam is not full, it's fine. But in the middle of the pandemic, when there is a burst of cases in the reservoir of the dam, the walls in the dam will creak and break. So this is what is going to happen if everybody is not going to get vaccinated. There should be the government would, the very idea is to vaccinate everybody, including, I mean, although it's not at lessons for children, I mean, there is likely the time would come that the children would receive the vaccines to prevent secondary transmission, particularly to vulnerable people within the family. I hope that answers the question.
If I could, sorry, Imam Shakir, if I could just we're clear on that, then, if you've got someone who feels, look, I'm young, I'm fairly healthy, my chances, say, of being affected from the coronavirus, I think, are fairly slim. We know the majority, up to 80%, will be asymptomatic. They won't have symptoms, or if they do, it will be mild. And there are potential risks of the vaccine. Few risks, as we've already discussed, but there are potential risks. And also there are things that we don't know about the vaccine itself. Should it be, or would it be a better approach that we focus first upon those who are higher risk, allow them the opportunity to get the vaccinations first, allow them the opportunity to take them slots and then vaccines, rather than sort of me trying to get in there first, say?
Yeah, I mean, the case fatality rate, like what Dr. Rahman had earlier pointed out, is higher in older adults. Definitely, there's no doubt in that. 1 in 4 adults above 80 plus die of COVID-19 if they contract the infection, and the numbers fall as the population becomes younger. But of course, if they have other comorbidities, then the fatality rises. I mean, at this point of time, what the government is doing is looking at the logistics. The pharmaceutical companies are willing to supply the number of, they are not hesitating. They'd say, yes, you want this many million doses, we will supply them. But it's the logistics of delivering the vaccine at the ground level. I mean, if the government has got 100 million doses in London, it simply does not have the capacity in UK to vaccinate all of the London population, simply because we don't have the personnel on the ground vaccinating. So we have to prioritize and we have to approach this in a tiered fashion. I mean, I can completely agree with JCVI and the government policy of prioritizing different population when a new vaccine comes. When you move on to countries where there are personnel available, for example, if you go to poorer countries, there are personnel available on the ground. Then if they have access to that many millions of doses, then they should vaccinate vaccine from the front door, anybody who comes. But in this country, we don't have that many personnel, and that's the reason why the army has been brought in to help the healthcare workers. But the bottom line is everybody needs to get vaccinated. There is also a moral dilemma, which I think I would put this to the audience. Yes, you may argue that a person may not die or have comorbidities if you are a younger and healthy young adult. But what happens if you get an asymptomatic infection and you take that back home, and if there is somebody vulnerable? You may have a parent who's elderly, you may have a relative who's got other comorbidities. And what happens if that person contracts the COVID-19? Maybe he has contracted from you because they've been asymptomatic, and then that person, God forbid, dies. Then we may ignore it, but I think somebody who knows the known and the unknown is likely to question that judgment. I think at the bottom line is, if you have to exactly answer that question, then we have to put it in risk versus benefit. What are the risks and what are the benefits? At this point of time, our knowledge says the benefits far outweigh the risk. The risks are bottom low. They're bottom to the carpet low. Thank you.
Can I just come in there, and just with regards to the tiers, I mean, I'd be probably something you're aware, maybe alluding to. I mean, at the moment, the JCVI, which is the committee which is advising in terms of how we vaccinate the population, have come up with tiers. So the highest priority group, which is our care home residents and their carers in our old people's homes, and the second group are those who are over 80. So because of the logistical nature of how we can administer, for example, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, which has to be kept at very low temperatures, really we've gone to that second group. So that's why we're vaccinating over 80s. With the AstraZeneca, which is easier to administer because it can be kept at fridge temperature, then we're addressing that top tier group as well. So those are the two top groups. It goes down by age. Then you've got above the 75s, above the 70s, who are clinically extremely vulnerable, and so on. And in 9 groups, the 9th one are people above 50. Now, if you're below 50 at the moment, as Dr. Ahmed had mentioned, with the prioritization that the JCVI has drawn up for the UK, if you're below 50 at the moment and you're healthy with no other medical history, you're not going to be called up for vaccination just yet. Unless you're a social worker or healthcare worker, again, then you fit into the higher group, the 80 plus, and that's another group that we're vaccinating. But below 50, you don't work in social care, healthcare, or anything like that, and you're fit and well, at the moment, you're not going to be called up for vaccination. So it already has been prioritized based on the sort of what's considered to be the most vulnerable at-risk groups.
Dr. Omar, a question here in terms of it is stated that the vaccination works better on Europeans rather than others. Is this assertion true?
Wajid, I'm not sure if you.
Dr. Jaweed will probably know better, and hopefully this gives you some confidence that we're not just making things up. He will know better, but from what I know, that there were a lot more ethnic minorities who take part in the trials, because our community doesn't take part in trials as much as, or maybe aren't called as much, whether it's which way around that is, or is it a little bit of both. So there'll be more evidence for the European community. But Dr. Jaweed probably will give more.
Yeah, thank you. I think, Dr. Wajid, you have already answered that question. I mean, just to add anything, if it makes sense. The volunteers in the trails, of course, it has to be, it will be, majority would be in the Caucasian population. It shouldn't come as a surprise, because these are based in European or in Caucasian populations. But there has been a proportion of ethnic minorities, African, Asian, and different minorities within the vaccine trail. They do admit, the experts in the vaccine groups, they do admit that they would be keen to do studies once it is rolled out, how the ethnic minorities respond to the vaccine. I mean, it's too early to comment with the knowledge we have at this time. But we know, all we know is that these are in the trials, these are highly efficacious vaccines.
Dr. Omar, I think this was addressed to some extent by Dr. Wajid, but I'll ask it. Somebody's asked this question. It is said that the vaccination can change your DNA. Is this true?
What? Yeah, muted. You're muted.
Apologies. Yeah. There's no evidence it can change your DNA. And there's no evidence that it can make you sterile. I think that's another big one that's going around. That's the latest one, that it can make people sterile. And you know, a lot of these things, they have like a very, a lie. I remember reading somewhere, and Imam Shakil will be able to tell me, that shaitan likes to stand somewhere between half in the light and half in the darkness, because that's the confusing zone. You know, like, so this is the same thing here, where when I'm not saying that anyone is shaitani by doing this, but when these things start, they have a grain of maybe truth somewhere in there. So, for example, at the when they do trials, they don't do trials on pregnant women or children. It's just normal. You just because that is a standard ethical procedure, that you don't start off by doing it on those people. Now, because they didn't do it in those people, and because they were being cautious in the beginning, where they were saying that if you're pregnant, whatever, don't, you know, or if you're planning to become pregnant, don't take the vaccine, then people come up with this thing saying it makes you sterile. That can be the only explanation, but there is no evidence whatsoever for this.
Dr. Wajid, can I ask as well then, there's a new variant now. Do we know that the vaccinations that were developed during the past year work on the new variant?
There is some evidence for the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine that it is effective even for the new variant, but it's early days. So we're still, and again, Dr. Jaweed will be able to give us a better answer. One point I will make to everyone is, remember, when you're comparing the vaccine, you're not comparing it to or being healthy. Because if there was no chance of you getting the disease, and there's no chance of you passing on the disease, and there's no chance of anyone you know dying from the disease, then why take the vaccine? Of course you would, you know, then you wouldn't take it. Compare the risks or the side effects, which are minimal, to the real chance of becoming sick with this disease, nauzubillah, or dying from this disease, nauzubillah, or having a loved one die from this disease, nauzubillah, or having your life be severely impaired because of the measures that we need to take to try to control the disease. When you compare those two, that's a fair comparison, because that's what you're really comparing. Even when you're comparing between, like, if someone says, well, I don't know, because a lot of people say it probably doesn't work on the mutation, so don't bother. Well, akhi, you know, if someone's offering you a vaccine and you're saying it probably doesn't work with the mutation, that means you're saying I'd rather die than take a vaccine which I'm not sure, or I'd rather people die or that I pass it on the disease than take a vaccine which I'm maybe doesn't work on the mutation. That's what you're saying. That's the balance.
What is more certain rather than doubtful?
It's unbelievable. The rest of the world is crying for the vaccine. They're saying the rich people have stored the vaccine. The rich countries have bought up all the vaccines. They're not going to get it for 2 years. For some estimates, in some countries in Asia, in Africa, they're not going to get the vaccine for 2 years. And you're getting it free. You're getting it delivered, and you're like, no, I'm not going to take it. Wallah al-Azim, you know, like there's got to be some element over here of understanding the ni'mah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, the blessings He's given you. Don't reject it out of hand. And again, this is not giving a blank check to the vaccine. Do your research, think about it, but be careful that you're not being ungrateful if you kind of do it based on a lack of information, lack of evidence, or to do it on a very cheaply, because a lot of people, again, I'm young, it doesn't bother me, it doesn't affect me. Of course it doesn't bother you. You know, there was a wedding, an Asian wedding that took place during the first lockdown, 200 people invited to it illegally. They did the study on this. And from that, one person was infected. 70 people became infected at that wedding. 7 people died. The 7 people who died were not at the wedding. They didn't even know who got married. They didn't know their killers. Those 7 people, you know, because the people who got infected, they went home, they gave it to somebody else, they went to school, they gave it. This is how it passes. People will die. The decisions that you make have got an impact on the lives of human beings, other people. And we have to think also about the collective, not just of ourselves.
Can I, sorry, can I, Dr. Ahmed, actually, I just wanted to sort of lead into to yourself, actually. I think a lot of people have concerns because they hear this is an RNA or an mRNA vaccine. So they then think about DNA and the changes it can have and so on. And perhaps, as I say, if I could maybe raise this issue and you could sort of address this, Dr. Ahmed, is that viruses actually contain RNA anyway. I mean, this is not a new thing in the sense. And when we get a virus, whether it's a common cold or whatever it is, actually you've got a virus that's got some RNA in it, and you know that's the process anyway. So I just want to raise that and maybe sort of lead into yourself, because I know you were going to answer the question as well.
Okay, thank you both. Going back to the question, Omar, about the variants, and this has generated a lot of heat in the popular press. I have seen even reputed newspapers publishing about the inefficacy of the vaccine against the variants, which is worrying because it's pure speculation at this stage. What we have to appreciate is the coronavirus is an RNA virus, and the RNA virus by the nature, they tend to mutate, means they tend to change their genetic code quite frequently, just because what we call in our in sciences the lack proofreading, unlike the DNA viruses. The most notable example is the influenza virus, and that's exactly the reason why every year we get the seasonal flu vaccine, because every year the flu vaccine keeps changing its genetic code. We have to address both the antigenic drifts every year, and every year we have the seasonal flu. Same thing happens with coronaviruses, but fortunately it doesn't happen to that extent as the influenza virus. The coronaviruses have been mutating and have been changing, and this should not come as a surprise. It is expected. But what I would like to emphasize is, because the popular press keeps using the word strains, new strains, I would like to emphasize the fact there has not been a single new strain of SARS-CoV-2 since its discovery. It's the same strain. Okay. There have been new variants, but not strain. There is a difference between variant and the strain. For a variant which has changed slightly its genetic composition. Yes, a strain is something which, even it has changed the way it behaves inside the host. For example, it may resist the antibody. So that's a strain. No strains have happened as of yet. Now, these 2 new variants, South African variant and the British, and the BA.1.1.17 variant, both reassuringly in some data, which both Pfizer and Moderna have done, it does seem to neutralize the virus. So that's reassuring. Having said all this, what I would like to emphasize again is, moving on, the virus is likely to mutate further on. There will be, as more people get vaccinated, there will be a vaccine pressure on the virus, and it might actually select mutants, maybe downstream. Maybe we don't know when that happens. Maybe I mean, most of the virologists do not anticipate within the next few months. It may take even up to the end of the year when the virus may actually mutate to such an extent that the vaccine may not respond. But however, at that time, we already have the backbone of the vaccine. Just like we had for the flu vaccines, we have the backbone. All we need to do is to do it. We don't need to go back and do again this phase 3 studies. We just have to tweak the vaccine at this stage to address the new variants. I'm sorry, Asad, what was your question?
There's two things that maybe if you could just mention it based on your sort of knowledge and your expertise. One was because I know a lot of people have worries about the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, which is an mRNA vaccine, which is obviously a new type of vaccine that's being used. And people hear RNA and they think of DNA, but actually viruses contain RNA anyway. And when we get infected, the RNA gets into our body. So that isn't something unusual. The other thing is just based on the last thing, is my understanding is that if there was to be a sort of a change or a mutation which may need an adjustment in the vaccination, and I think the mRNA vaccines can be adapted very quickly. So is that something maybe you could speak about to mention those 2 points?
Yeah, as I said earlier in our conversation, this mRNA vaccine is delivered by a lipid nanoparticle. Basically, the whole idea is to get this mRNA inside the cytoplasm of the cell. The way the viruses infect human beings is every day, each one of us, human beings, we come across probably thousands, if not millions of viruses every day. And viruses many of the viruses are beneficial as well. Now, when the virus enters, the very idea of the virus is to replicate. And the way it does is, it goes down inside the cell. It can either go into the inside, what we call the heart of the cell, which is the nucleolus, or into the cytoplasm of the cell, where the DNA or the RNA, because the viruses either have DNA or they have RNA. They can't have both. So either of the two viruses, they go down inside the cell, and most of the viruses, what they do is they produce the mRNA. And this is the central dogma of genetics, which is basically the mRNA then transcribes into other genes or translates into other proteins. Now, what is being delivered in the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine is a ready-made mRNA which codes for the protein which binds to the receptor cell, which is basically somebody, say Mr. A is susceptible to COVID-19, then he has got cells in his respiratory tract, and when the virus goes inside, they'll attach to a specific, like a lock and key. So the lock, and the lock is the respiratory cell, the key is the virus. When the key binds to the cell, has a lock and key. Now, what the mRNA is trying to do is, which is in the vaccines, is to go inside the cytoplasm, produce that kind of proteins which block that lock that key completely, and therefore preventing entry of the cell into the cell, even if it manages to enter inside the cell, because there is a host T cell response already aware because of the vaccination. The phagocytosis happen, which basically is destruction of the affected cells, and then there is a T cell which signals the B cells, and then the T cell signals massively propagates, massively produces those cells, which effectively produces to destroy the keys. I mean, I'm trying to be simplistic. I can't be. I'm afraid.
Can I try be even more simplistic?
Yes.
So there are 3 types of ways that your vaccines work. Number 1, imagine your child. You can teach your child 3 ways on how to not steal. Number 1, you let him, he steals, and then you teach him that's bad, don't steal. So that's vaccine number 1. That's a live vaccine. Vaccine number 2 is that is an inactivated vaccine that you show your child, look, that person is stolen and this is bad, so don't steal. Yeah, he's seen so you're showing the dead vaccine, but it's not a live version. It cannot affect that person. So you're teaching the child not to steal. The mRNA is the best one. It's giving a khutbah, don't steal, and your child learns the lesson without having to either take part in stealing or to actually have to witness this. It's just showing the spike protein. So it's literally just giving them the signal, just the concept of stealing and the spike protein, and then they learn the lesson from that. I know that's like, look, I know that there must be scientists all over the world right now rolling their eyes saying, what the heck is this guy talking about? But I like to make analogies, and for me, that one it helps for you to understand that actually mRNA is, my goodness, we're excited about this because this is an advancement, not in a bad way, in a much safer, much better way than what we've had before.
Yeah, thank you. I remember that analogy, very useful analogy. Thank you. In response to Dr. Asad's second part of the question, the mRNA codes for more than 20 amino acids, the whole of the spike protein. The reason why the experts are confident in saying the variants at this point of time, the vaccine is effective in the variants, is because the changes are very few on the spike protein. What mRNA is currently coding is for the whole spike protein, so it shouldn't affect the efficacy. But what may happen is like downstream, because of various reasons, like vaccine pressure, when there's a variant which, if at all, if it arises, that it can escape vaccine escape mutants, then it is easy to go back to the mRNA, which is our backbone now of this vaccine, and to tweak that into a new genetic code, just like the way we manufactured in the first place.
Imam. Brothers, conscious of time, but some very, very important kind of like questions have come through. So there's one here in terms of, it says, what do you say to people who say that COVID-19 is another invisible enemy, similar to the war on terror, designed to erode people's freedom and restructure the financial system? So I don't know who wants to tackle that one.
Dr. Wajid, if you could, I mean, you touched upon it. If you unmute.
Jazakallah. What I say to people is that you have a right to have skepticism about powerful people wanting to consolidate power. And you have a right to think that the financial system wants to maintain its financial system. There is evidence for this, and you are not going out of your bounds by thinking along those lines, because this is that's normal. But when it strays into a certain territory where you think that people who would normally be against each other are working together, when people who you know are like your healthcare professionals are part of this conspiracy, that your ulama are part of this conspiracy. We have muftis who are doing great work. There's Mufti Osman Maravia, who did fantastic work on for the Journal of Bima on vaccines, and there's many scholars across the world. Then it's, then you're really going at a level that doesn't make sense and is actually harmful to yourself. You're denying yourself. We don't want to go into that territory where we go from healthy to unhealthy skepticism.
Another question: why is HIV virus not transmittable on surfaces and airborne like COVID-19?
David.
For a virus to cause an infection in a human being, there needs to be some kind of receptors on the cell surfaces. Now, the HIV does not have receptors like that roaming around in the respiratory tract. It has in the blood, which is the CD4 receptor. Unlike the COVID-19 virus, the receptor is in the respiratory tract. It binds into it's just like the same analogy of the lock and key. There is no locks for COVID, for HIV in the respiratory tract, but there are the locks for COVID-19 in the respiratory tract. If that answers the question. Thank you.
Dr. Omar, why is COVID-19 being tested through nasal passage when science has proven to us the virus is transmittable through saliva? Why not test the saliva?
David.
We have been testing all kinds of samples in the last 10 months. In all over, to the best of my knowledge, we have tested even spinal fluids, blood, heart biopsies for SARS-CoV-2 RNA for COVID-19. The saliva is a very good sample for testing for COVID-19. There have been good papers which have proven that fact. but so is nose and throat swab, so is the nasopharyngeal swab. So any sample from the upper respiratory tract is good enough. But I think the questioner is alluding to some articles which say salivas are excellent. This is kind of a debate. Saliva is an equally good sample.
Another question here: from your knowledge on past vaccinations, can you think of any disputable factor based on an Islamic perspective that could later arise?
Dr. Wajid, what are your thoughts?
I'll be interested to hear what Dr. Asad says, but let me put it this way, brothers and sisters. No one's writing a blank check. No one is saying you must get it and etc. etc. We're recommending it. So at the end of the day, you make the decision, and that's really important for everyone to realize, because we start getting people saying that you're telling we have to do etc. etc. We are strongly recommending it, but you have to make the decision, and no one can predict the future. So if you want us to say that we can guarantee you nothing's going to go wrong in the future, I mean, we're not going to do that. That would be arrogant. But it would also equally be arrogant to say that the work that has been done so far, the research that's been done so far, is worthless, and essentially this is experimental and this is testing on human beings. Both of those positions are extremes of the spectrum. And the reality is that this is something that has evidence base. Would we have loved to have tested it for 10 years? I would have loved it to test it for 10 years before I took the vaccine myself. But that means 10 years worth of people dying at a rate of 1,000 a day or however many. It's not feasible. So that's what we're saying, brothers and sisters. No one's writing a blank check. Please don't mistake that to be it. But we are saying that this is very, very serious. I mean, I can't tell you how much more serious it is until unless you speak to my colleagues, and they will tell you as well.
Two more questions, inshallah. Dr. There's many more, but I know, Dr. Omar, that Celcom will be organizing something. So please speak about that when it will be, and I'm sure some of the panelists from here will be attending. But I'll finish off on these two. So one here is, does the vaccine stop? I think Dr. Javed kind of like touched on it or addressed it slightly. Does the vaccine stop the contagiousness or transmissibility of the virus to others, or is it simply protects the person taking it, and does it cure the new variants coming up from different countries?
Javed, if you can.
I think those topics have been touched. And basically, to summarize, currently, as of now, to our knowledge, the vaccine is efficacious against the variants. As of now, it may change, but when it may change, when the variants acquire a lot of mutations, that it may change the spike of the protein of the spike of the virus. That if that happens, then at that stage we would say the vaccine is no longer efficacy. But by the time we arrive to that stage, we have the luxury, I should say, that to tweak the vaccine if we come to that stage. What we know is that, and what the vaccine manufacturers are clear in saying, is that they do not prevent transmissibility of the infection or the virus. So it protects only the individual receiving the vaccine. And that's the reason. Again, it drives us back to the principal idea of this conversation, is to develop that herd immunity as much as possible in encouraging as many people to get the vaccine when the time comes.
I could add, I mean, it illustrates the transparency of these trials as well, and the emphasis really of those in particular at risk, as I said, mentioned the tier system, to take the vaccine to protect themselves at the very least, with the research ongoing in terms of the spread and how it can infect, we may be able to infect others or not. Imam Shakir?
Yes, inshallah. A question here. Pfizer has been fined $3 billion before, and you are suggesting we take the vaccine, especially it's just been less than a year worth of testing. What do you have to say about that?
Discuss, Dr. Wajid. I mean, you discussed it before. You could summarize.
Sorry, I missed a question. Brother Asad, do you mind taking this one?
The question was that Pfizer had been fined, I think they said 3 billion or something in the past, and are we suggesting we take a vaccine that's had less than a year's worth of research or study? I mean, I think the aspects of research and study we've already spoken about, and in terms of what process that takes and is still ongoing. I'm not sure about the sort of fining of Pfizer. I mean, again, we've mentioned or touched on issues of pharmaceutical companies. Again, I mean, what do we say then when actually the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine is used up, and then we have the AstraZeneca one or the Moderna one? I mean, are we looking at each of the individual companies? You know, I mean, it's I'd have to look at the the individual case of that. But I think as a principle, if we're looking at the developments and we're looking at the the reasons why we're giving the vaccines, I think we've really spoken about that already. So yeah.
And are you going to stop taking all drugs? Is it just a vaccine? Pfizer doesn't just make the vaccine, right? You're just going to stop taking everything because you might as well do that. So let's stop. You know, the questions you have to ask. Think before you ask some of the questions. Think about what you're saying. Pfizer is evil. All pharmaceuticals are evil. So then go live without drugs. See how long that gets you. Live without without the advancements. Be reasonable in that thing. Do you, if you're going for emergency surgery, do you turn around and go to your surgeon? I want to know your aqidah. What were you? What's your? You know what? You don't. You get on with the doctor. Save my life, Dr. Saab. You're already like, let's go for it. Inshallah, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is the one who protects. But you know this is what I'm not saying blanket. We've got to be very careful. Don't trust Pfizer. But if you don't, if you don't trust Pfizer, that's fine. But if someone who you do trust is telling you to trust them for this instance, in this case, especially when there's a fire going around, the pandemic, then if you don't trust them as well, you don't trust anyone, then who will you trust?
There was another question I think that was asked about, I think I didn't quite get the question, I think before this, about long-term effects of vaccines. I think that's what they were getting at. You know, do we think of anything previous Islamically? And I don't know if that was what they were alluding to. I mean, I would mention that even with viral illnesses, there are long-term effects. I mean, don't forget, with COVID-19, we're already seeing young, healthy people have had it, and they have suffered with it's incredible fatigue. I mean, they can't even go back to work. I mean, these are successful people who are, it is not in their character to be like this. And so there are long-term effects even with the viruses that we see. I mean, even other viruses, bit mumps or so on, there has been reported cases of sterility down the line. So even with viral illnesses, you're looking at long-term effects with them. And so we need to be aware of that as well in the sort of profile of some of these viruses. And just something maybe I can ask for Dr. Wajid as well. I'm sorry to kind of maybe butt in at this point, but I'm very aware that with the vaccine program rolling out very quickly now, that people are being called in for the vaccination. So the BEMA have already come up with a statement for the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. The AstraZeneca one is one that now we're giving out or administering a lot of. As you mentioned, it does contain a small amount of ethanol in there. I wonder if it's possible to give some kind of clarity, because people may then have that sort of reservation about it. I think BEMA are in the process of bringing out a statement about.
Literally, I apologize if you saw me swiveling around between chairs because there was some urgent messages going on. But yes, in the process of putting out a statement on the Oxford vaccine, in the process of starting one on the Moderna vaccine, inshallah. And again, bring different expert opinions on this, including like Dr. Jaweed's.
Yeah. Shakir, was that it with the questions? Or I mean, it's worth mentioning that on Thursday at 8 p.m. we'll be having a discussion on the COVID vaccinations. Dr. Wajid, Dr. Javeed, we have Marjan, Jamal, Public Health, and Imam Shakil will be there. If there are any questions that were unanswered today, I really do encourage you to make it. It's South East London and Kent Council of Mosques have arranged this. So please do your best to make that if there are any unanswered questions. But on behalf of the panelists, big Jazakumullah khairan for everyone who has attended, and a big thank you for each of our respected panelists, Dr. Wajid, Dr. Javeed, Dr. Asad, and of course Imam Shakil. for putting this event on. Dr. Wajid, you have?
I just want to say one thing before we go. I know we're talking about vaccines. My brothers and sisters, the situation outside is absolutely critical. Right now, you know, there's an Islamic principle that we don't just stop fitna, we close the door to fitna, right? Today, the door to fitna is your front door. Please don't go outside if you can help it. Please don't mix households. Don't take chances. Please don't mix with your family. Don't try, even your parents, just for 1 minute. You can't outsmart, you can't outrun, you cannot outthink the virus. Please, the next few weeks, Nauzubillah, it's absolutely, you know, like I'm shaking inside when I, like when I think what's coming towards us, what is already here in East London and what is coming towards us, Nauzubillah. So please, we're begging you on our hands and knees. This is serious. Close your doors. Only go out. Be very, very careful. Make lots of dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect you and your loved ones. And don't take any chances. This is really, really important. And I apologize for taking up the last point, but I just really want to make that urgent that, you know, the next 2-3 weeks is extremely important for what's going to hit us, Nauzubillah.
Barakallah fiqh for that. I think it's actually helpful to have final comments from each of our respected guests. So Dr. Wajid, thank you for that. Dr. Asad, final thoughts?
No, Jazakallah khair for the two fellow panelists here and for clarifying points. I mean, it's really just to raise the issue that you have got this other follow-up event on Thursday, Omar, which perhaps can focus on some of the questions as well that people clearly have. And just really just to echo the advice of that we've heard today, and to remember, obviously first and foremost, that we make a dua, that we remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we seek his help and protection in all of our affairs.
David?
Thank you very much to everyone here, and Jazakallah khair. And it's been an honor and privilege to be on this highly intellectual conversation. Sure, thanks for sharing your thoughts, and thanks to the wider audience for their questions. And just as a disclaimer, there might have been errors, and these are bound to happen, and may Allah forgive us for that. Your final piece of advice for everyone, when your time comes, please, I strongly recommend that you get vaccinated as soon as possible when your time comes. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Just to thank everyone, Dr. Javed, a special thanks to yourself. Very beneficial gems and points that you mentioned today. May Allah Ta'ala reward you with khair, increase you in khair. And likewise, Dr. Wajid, Dr. Asad, Dr. Omar, inshallah, this discussion of ours, I pray Allah Ta'ala puts this in your mizan of hasanat, and inshallah makes it a means for you to enter Jannah al-Firdaus and your family members. Very important point, and I think, inshallah, please do join the CELCOM discussion on the 14th. And I think crucially, there are specialists in the field, and it's not the imams, it's yourselves. And I think the public do need to listen to you. And I also ask Allah Ta'ala to reward those that Dr. Asad mentioned. You know, sometimes it's insulting that we, think of people just making money. There are healthcare professionals and doctors and nurses in the front line really sacrificing. So we need to really thank them as well, and also ask Allah Ta'ala to give shifa to anyone who is ill and affected by this illness, and ask Allah Ta'ala to forgive our brothers and sisters who have passed away and grant them Jannah and Rahmah. Jazakumullah khair.